So welcome, friends, as you come in. I'm here with Malini Iyer, who is an amazing Vedic astrologer. We share a teacher of Vedic astrology, and Malini and I met at a retreat on Vedic astrology and really connected over a lot of mutual interests in classical dance and Vedic astrology. And she's really an up and coming young Vedic astrologer who's really taking the art in new directions. And so I'm just really thrilled to get to share some of her magic with you all in our Consciousness and Healing Summit. So welcome, Malini.
Hi, Justine. Thank you so much for organizing this summit, the Consciousness and Healing Summit. It's a rare opportunity for such unique minds to come together, right? So I'm grateful for that. Before we begin, a little bit about myself. Like Justine said, both me and her share a teacher, Sam Jeffy, that's from whom I learned Vedic astrology. I'm a research scientist by training. My area of research is diabetes and obesity. I would look at the physiology of it. During my PhD, I think, this was in 2013, about 7-8 years ago, I came across Sam, and then dived deep into Vedic astrology and never looked back. And a lot of concepts that I'm showing here today are pretty deep. We're just touching on things. But if you want to know more, please free to reach out. I'll have my contact information out there. So feel free to reach out. But we are just touching the tip of the iceberg. Each concept itself is very deep. So I'll be talking about how spirit takes form, which is why we study astrology in the first place. Do you mind sharing my screen?
I will. Malini, we're getting a little tiny bit of echo.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's the earbuds or something that's coming through. Just to be aware, I'll let you know if it continues. And I think as we share the screen, I may turn my video off so people can see the screen and see you. And then I'll pop in with questions from time to time. And if anyone has questions on the Zoom meeting or in Facebook, I'll be monitoring so that I can ask those questions for you, because I know that Malini is going to go deep and share a lot of really beautiful information in this presentation. So go ahead, Malini.
Is there a presentation mode in this one?
Yeah.
Can you hit play?
Yeah, there we go.
Yes. Thank you. So like I said, I'll be talking about how spirit takes form, which is what the practice of astrology is. It is understanding how the spirit or the soul comes and takes form into a body. So we're going to touch upon some concepts in quantum physics to back the concepts that I'm talking about. And like Justine said, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, I'll just try and time nicely. And so everyone knows who's watching on Facebook or with us in the Zoom meeting, I'll be sending out all of the contact information for all of the presenters at the end with a full collection of recordings for you all. So you didn't get to write down Malini's information in the last slide, no worries.
Okay, thank you. So as we know, the sun is about 4.5 billion years old. But the first life form began on this planet only 500 million years ago. And the first humans showed up about 100,000 years ago. So for almost like 9/10 of the sun's life, or the life of the solar system, there was no life. When we talk about human beings, we actually talk about conscious life form, right? We have a consciousness, we are thinking animals, and we direct our life in a certain way. And the formation of this conscious life form, or the birth of this conscious life form, came into being when the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon locked into a 108 pattern. What is that 108 pattern? Which is the distance between the Sun and the Earth is actually 108 times the diameter of the Sun. And then the distance between the Earth and the Moon is 108 times the diameter of the Moon. And, you know, because of the revolution of the Moon around the Earth and the revolution of the Earth around the Sun, this ratio keeps shifting very little by a fraction. So maybe in another 100,000 years, we may not have the Moon in this exact 108 pattern, and we might lose conscious life on Earth. But for right now, for our purposes, what gives rise to conscious life is this locking of this pattern, the 108 pattern. And it's important to understand that because the Moon represents our mind on a body on Earth, on a physical body on Earth. The Moon actually represents the mind, and that's where karmas enter our consciousness. And I'm going to talk about karmas and ripening of karmas tomorrow at 10 on the same platform. And then the Sun represents our soul, right? The untouched part of us. Can we go to the next slide? So to understand astrology and how planets influence consciousness on Earth, which is our conscious mind and our conscious being on Earth, I decided to take the example of Einstein's theory of relativity, right? So Einstein has two theory of relativity, which he first gave the special relativity theory, which is, you know, for the speed of light is actually constant for all observers, no matter how fast they are traveling or their rates of travel. And so as a result of that, as a result of that assumption of speed of light being constant, what he found is that the space-time continuum is interwoven. It's like a fabric. So the space and time are not different. They are interwoven together in order to maintain the speed of light constant for every single object. Using this whole space-time continuum, he went on, it took him another 10 years to establish the general theory of relativity, which says that massive objects distort the space-time continuum, which is what gravity is. So each object has an influence over the other object, and they create a dimple or a bend in this space-time, right? And that's a hint into how various planets actually influence our consciousness on Earth. The next slide. So the bigger the object, the bigger the dimple in the space-time continuum. So the fabric that you see, the grids that you see is actually the space-time continuum. On the left, we are seeing how Sun, which is a much massive object as compared to Saturn and Jupiter, has a bigger effect on the space-time continuum, has a bigger effect on consciousness per se. And then on the right, you can see Earth and Moon is so small compared to Earth and Sun, and it just creates a tiny ripple, right? But that ripple is really important for life on Earth to perceive consciousness. The next slide. So planets, the Sanskrit name for planets is grahas. Grahas literally means to grab. So planets are these forces that grab our consciousness into this karmic pattern because of how they affect the space-time continuum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Next slide. So Vedic astrology, or astrology per se, I'm not going to use the word Vedic till later on, is the study of how these different objects that we perceive from our vantage point on Earth affect life and consciousness on Earth itself, right? So Vedic astrology is the science. It started as a science that measures space and the speed of objects. It's measuring space, it's measuring distance that is moving through space, right? And this is important to know because all ancient successful civilizations studied astrology, whether it's the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Chinese, the Persians, the Mayans, they all studied astrology. So astrology and astronomy were sister sciences up until like 2000 years ago, right? They were sister sciences, where astronomy is the physical science that studies the laws of physics, and then astrology is the metaphysical science. It's the metaphysics of it. And what they were really doing is measuring how far and how quickly these objects move in the sky on Earth, right? From Earth, when you can see the sky, how quickly the objects move through the sky. And that's actually the birth of geometry, algebra, calculus, and all kinds of complex mathematics like trigonometry. That's where it comes from, because they were trying to measure what they were seeing in the sky. So the sky that we can see from Earth, on the figure on the, I can't actually drive my cursor to show you guys, but the figure on the right, the square is, imagine the Earth in the center there. And then the two concentric circles is the sky. The sky that we can see, if you consider it roughly like a circle, it's 360 degrees. So that 360 degrees is divided into 27 equal portions of space called nakshatra. Kshetra really means space. So nakshatra means the space that is occupied by the stars or constellations. And then each of this nakshatra is further divided into 4 portions. And if you multiply 4 by 27, that 27 equal portions comes to 108. So there are 108 portions. The same portion of space is also divided into 12 zodiacs. So 360 degrees divided by 12 gives you 30 equal degree portions. That forms the zodiac sign. And then we measure 9 planets, which is Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, and Rahu and Ketu through the space, how they're moving through the space and how they're affecting consciousness on Earth, right? These are that big objects that are actually causing the ripples or the dimples in the space-time continuum that affects life on Earth, right?
Melanie, for those who aren't familiar, will you just mention who Rahu Ketu are?
I will get into Rahu Ketu a little bit later. But just to give you a brief idea, Rahu and Ketu are shadow or imaginary points in space. And from our vantage point on Earth, we can see the orbit of the sun and the moon. So they intersect at 2 points. Those 2 points, the ascending end of that point is called Rahu. The descending end of that point is called Ketu. And I have a diagram later that we can look at. So Vedic astrology or astrology originally was used to invoke energies like in yagyas, especially during Vedic times, right? If they had to do something auspicious, or they had to start writing an epic like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, or even write the Vedas, they would actually invoke these energies in the stars, the 27 constellations, to perform certain activities which were considered auspicious in nature. Horoscopic astrology, reading yours and mine chart and where planets are in our charts, that's relatively new compared to what astrology was used in the past. And each of these 27 nakshatras, which I'm not going to go into, but each of these 27 nakshatras is actually associated with deities and stories and mythological stories that bring out these qualities of these nakshatra. And they're very rich. These stories come from Vedic periods. It comes during a time where people were doing intense sadhana or tapasya to understand or download what this energy of this portion of sky meant, right? So in today's term, in the New Age term, we'll call them a download. But in Vedic times, they were doing intense tapasyas to just connect with that energy. The next slide. So a case for the sidereal zodiac. What I'm talking about when I say sidereal, it's star-based, right? It's using the 27 constellations. And in the upcoming slides, I'm going to make a case for the sidereal zodiac, which is actually the biggest difference between Vedic and Western astrology. Western astrology is tropical zodiac based. The next slide. So this is the sky that I showed you, and we have the Earth in the center. So the sidereal zodiac pins, if you can see the black line, it pins the beginning of the zodiac sign. Mesha is Aries. So 0 degrees Aries is actually pinned to 0 degrees Ashwini, that's the nakshatra. So you're measuring the zodiac, which is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, the 12 zodiac, based on the scale or based on the grid of the nakshatras. So the nakshatras are these stars, physical stars that we can see from Earth, and the zodiac are these imaginary portions that we have created, right? So we pin 0 degrees Aries to 0 degrees Ashwini. Now, what happens is there is something called as precession of equinoxes, which literally means the Earth's axis is slightly tilted, and over a period of time, that tilt increases. So from the 0 degrees Aries, the tilt has now increased. Today, as of this morning, it's about 24.09 degrees, right? And that tilt is what causes precession of equinoxes, is what it's called. So if you look at the equinoxes, if you draw the equinoxes on Earth and then you project it back to the sky, it has processed, or it has moved from what it originally was. If you are using 0 degree Aries, 0 degree Ashwini as the beginning of the zodiac. And what happens in tropical zodiac, the precession is not accounted for. So there is almost, each sign is about 30 degrees. There is almost a 24 degrees difference, right? So if you're, for example, if your sun sign is Taurus in Western zodiac, most likely it is one sign move. It's probably Aries in sidereal zodiac or in Vedic astrology. So because of this precession of equinoxes. So what causes the tilt? Can you hit next? What causes this tilt? So the tilt or the precession of equinoxes is caused by a slight wobble in the Earth's axis. That wobble can also be the result of the sun's revolution around its binary star. So there is this whole theory of the sun being in a relationship with a binary star. The binary star is not in the center, but it's slightly to the side of the sun's movement around this elliptical movement around this star. And because of that, there is this shift in Earth's axis, because the sun is taking the Earth around it and it's going around this big star. There's a shift in that axis, which causes this tilt, increase in tilt over a period of time. The other thing that we all need to also see is that this is the tilt that causes what we call the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius. And we are far away from the age of Aquarius. Just a side note, just a fun side note. We are still in the age of Pisces, right? And if you do the calculations, it will come to about 450 years before we hit the age of Aquarius. That means the Earth's tilt has hit Aquarius. Next slide. So I picked it up from the Isha Foundation, run by Sadhguru. There is a YouTube video, and this is just a fun side note about sun and its binary star. So the binary star is in the center, and then the sun is the one that is going around this binary star, which is what creates yugas. And why is this important? Because these yugas are created by how close our sun is to this binary star. And that has a profound effect on our consciousness. So if this binary star, and some say it's serious, but others say it's unknown what this binary star is. The closer our sun is to this binary star, the greater this binary star has an effect on us, right? The greater that ripple effect. So it has a greater effect on our consciousness. So the closer we are to Satyug. Satyug is a time period where consciousness is really high. People are extremely spiritual. The furthest away we are from the star, we are in Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is where consciousness is at really low. That means it's very dark. It's very hard to access the light within us. And this whole cycle of the sun making this entire circle is about 2,920 Earth years. So just a fun side note. And also a fun side note is right now, and this is the calculation that, of course, this was shown in the video by Sadhguru, but it's the same calculation that Lahiri Mahashay and Sri Yukteswar used, and which shows that in like 70 years we are going to hit Treta Yuga, which is the next best time to live, right? We are really getting closer to this binary star. A lot of people still believe we are in Kali Yuga, but Kali Yuga is the time where wars are rampant. Dwapar Yuga is the next best time to live, which is a age of electricity and information. Treta Yuga is the age of energy, so using energy to do things. And then Sat Yuga is the time of enlightenment, where they say they say that you don't even have to speak, you can just communicate using your thoughts, right? So just a fun side note. Next slide. You can click next to let the whole thing come. Okay, yeah. So what brings consciousness into, because if you think about consciousness as energy and that energy is affecting our mind, what brings that into physical reality? So let's think about the double slit experiment. The double slit is, there are two slits put in parallel cardboards, and then you send light through one of the slit and then collect and through both the slits and then collect the image on a screen. In the double slit experiment, if there is no observer, the patterns of light formed on that screen that you're collecting the light particles, which are photons, is one way. As soon as you put an observer anywhere, if you put the observer between the screen and the first slit, between the first slit and the second slit, or in the beginning, the pattern of light on the screen changes. Why is that? And if you double slit experiment is a fun thing to just study, and even there are several YouTube videos on it, and then there are several animations on it, which helps break it down in very layman's terms. But the assumption is that photons, which are light particles or particles of light and energy, exist both as physical particles, they're like packets of energy, and also waves. So these packets of energy are traveling in waves. So they exist in several probabilities in superposition. So all kinds of probabilities are possible. So they're existing in two different states. One is a particle, and this packet of particle is traveling like a wave. Yeah, like if you see a dolphin, and if you think of a dolphin as a whole particle, and then it's going like a wave, so it exists as both as a particle and the wave, and it exists in multiple positions and in multiple locations until somebody observes it. So the observation itself, the act of observation itself, collapses that wave of probability into one distinct possibility, one distinct property. And so all the superpositions, all the probabilities collapse into one based on who's observing. This is the same principle that is used or is thought in all yogic cultures about the observer and the object, right? The observer is constant and steady. He's Shiva. He is the ultimate masculine. And the object that he's observing is Shakti. She's constantly changing. But when Shiva observes, the observer observes the object, it collapses it into one reality. So conscious observation by our mind collapses that range of possibilities into one reality. And that's what we are reading and studying in Vedic astrology. We are studying all the highest potential, all the probabilities that's possible, and how that person's psyche or his mind or consciousness is going to collapse it into probably one or two probabilities, right? Based on their karmas and their inclinations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Next slide. So let's think about these 9 planets that we have talked about. They're causing these ripples in the space-time continuum, and how they're creating karma. What do they influence in our karmic patterns, right? So Sun stands for, his main quality is power. It's a masculine planet and rules a masculine sign, Leo. So power, confidence, your radiance, your universal self, your connection to your soul, that all is what Sun influences. Moon rules the sign of Cancer, which is feminine, right? And what it influences is your feeling nature, your connection. And these are like not connection to just people, but your connection to yourself, your creativity, how it feels to just be alive. That's what Moon influences. It's also the place where karmas enter your mind. And this is important because I have a slide on that. We have to remember this point. Karmas enter the mind through the moon for a very particular reason. We'll come to that in a bit. Mars rules, his masculine nature of Mars is seen in Aries. So and masculine meaning it's externalized. The observer, it's the observer, right? So its energy is externalized. Feminine, the energy is internalized. So it's receiving the observation or the gaze. It's receiving. So the energy is internalized. So Mars influences strength in us. Strength, discipline, self-willed action. So its external strength is expressed in Aries, and the internal strength that is required to move through different insecurities in life is expressed through Scorpio, right? Mercury influences intelligence, so flexibility, communication, skill, humor, it influences that. The external intelligence of Mercury is seen through the sign of Gemini. The internal intelligence that is required to organize life is seen through Virgo. Jupiter influences meaning, hope, teachings, higher philosophies in life, and external meaning or external philosophies is expressed through Sagittarius. Internal philosophies are the metaphysical nature and looking for something higher, which doesn't have any external physical validation. That portion of Jupiter is expressed through Pisces. Venus influences or invokes happiness within us, right? And happiness, beauty, enjoyment, respect for me and you, respect for others. That's all what Venus rules and influences. Its external quality, the external happiness from other things, from other people, from objects, all that externalized happiness is seen or expressed through Libra. Internal happiness, how I feel within my home or my community or my close friends, that internal happiness, what is created or generated within us, is expressed through Taurus. Saturn represents structure. So it's the pressure of time, it's the limitation, it's the commitment, it's perseverance, right? The external structure or external expression of Saturn's structure is seen through Aquarius, where we want to have structure in the world and we want to create something, a legacy in the world, right? And then the internal structure is expressed through Capricorn, where I'm going to organize and structure my internal life so I can achieve something else, right? I'll get up in time. I'll commit to running every day 5 miles so I can run a marathon at the end of the month, something like that. That internal structure is expressed through Capricorn. And then Rahu and Ketu.
Sorry.
That's okay. And Rahu and Ketu are these invisible forces. And like I said, if you're on Earth, Earth is in the center, and the orbit of the sun and the orbit of the moon from our vantage point on Earth, where they intersect, the north or ascending point is Rahu, and the south or descending point is Ketu. And these are shadow planets, right? So Rahu shows where they're not tangible. They don't have a physical form. Rahu and Ketu are imaginary points. They don't have physical form. So they confuse the mind because there is nothing physical or tangible to touch, grab. They confuse the mind in different ways. Rahu confuses the mind in trying to create chaos because it's so desire filled. Rahu is like the marching army. It wants and wants and wants and wants. And then Ketu is the one that looks away from the world and doesn't want to do anything. So that contrast, wherever Rahu Ketu are placed in your chart, you will see there's a high desire to want and do things or achieve things or just, accumulate a lot where Rahu is placed. Where Ketu is placed, we tend to just dissociate and move away from those things. So they confuse. And so this is how the 9 planets, they influence our mind in trying to create karma. The next slide. And then these 9 planets are placed in this 12 houses, right? And they affect then various areas of life. So these 12 houses form various areas of life. The first to fourth house is actually represents self, how things affect ourself. First house is your body, your individual self. Second house is the wealth or your possessions or your value systems, the things you eat, money, all those things. Third house is the house of siblings and peers whom you compete with or whom you friction with. And actually in that friction is where you figure out your own personal desires, like what you want in life or what you want for yourself. Very egoistic. Fourth house is the house of mother, but literally it's the house of nurturing or your emotional core where you feel nurtured and you feel comfortable. So it's the house of heart, and these first 4 form self, how things influence self. Houses 5th through 8th is how things affect others in our life. So 5th house is the house of our heart's desire, right? Literally children or creativity. 6th house is the house of struggles and hard work, where we're working really hard in the world. And also the area of life is illness, because to combat illness, the body struggles and works really hard. 7th house is the house of marriage, literally partnership. There's equal give and take, and 2 people come together, mutual respect, right? And then 8th house is the house where we know that we don't have any control over other people. So we have all these desires that we have so attached with other people, but 8th house is where it shows us how other people are so unpredictable, and we don't have any control over other people's behaviors or situations that show up in life that other people are involved in. Literally death of self life, right? Houses 9 to 12 show our relationship with the universal self or the universe itself, or higher philosophies, religion, just things that are beyond us and others. They're beyond our life on planet, right? So 9th house is the house of beliefs and purpose. Can be religion, but your higher philosophies. 10th house is the house of impact. What impact are you creating on the world that is everlasting? Like for example, something as simple as planting a tree, right? And you know, when you plant a tree, you're not going to enjoy the fruits of the tree in this lifetime. Maybe somebody else who comes after you will enjoy the fruits of the tree or the shade of the tree. So that's the impact that you're creating. How you yourself in this body are affecting that space-time continuum, right? Like these planets are affecting it. How you are affecting the world itself, how you're affecting the world, the other people or the population on this earth itself, right? 11th house is the house of highest ambition in terms of society. What are you doing for society? You know, so for some people, it's working towards global warming, politics, just things that are bigger than you and larger than life itself. And then 12th house is where you just let go of everything because nothing belongs to you, right? It's escapism, but it's also like, you know, a very disciplined 12th house is literally meditation, uh, conscious letting go, surrender to the higher forces, which are bigger than just you and me. So these are the areas of life these planets influence, right? Next slide. The other thing that is really important to remember is that becomes that actually collapses that universal force into your unique consciousness is Luckna or ascendant on rising sign. This is a very important concept. Luckna literally means marriage. So the term for marriage in Hindi and Sanskrit is Luckna. What it really means is the intersection of the eastern horizon with the rising sky. That marriage of that rising sky and the eastern horizon is what is Luckna. So literally, in layman's terms, the sign that is rising in the east, right? Like the sun rises in the east every about approximately 2 hours, 2.5 hours, a section of the sky rises, and that section of the sky that connects with the horizon forms the Luckna. Why is this important? So on the left, I think it's the left on your screen too. On the left, when I showed that chart, if you see the number 1, the first house itself is Aries. What that really means is, if you take this as an Aries Luckna or for an Aries rising person, the sign that was rising in the east was Aries. So that orients their entire life, which makes Taurus their second house, Leo their fifth house, Capricorn their 10th house. So 10th house, like we said, we saw is career. So the way an Aries person goes about their career is in a very Capricorn-like way, like step by step, planning, figuring things out, not making too many, not making too many risky decisions, calculations, and calculate risks, something like that. On the right, I have the rising at Scorpio. So if you see the number 1 or the rising, the Luckna is at Scorpio. Vrishchik is Scorpio. And what it means is for this particular person, Scorpio rising, the sign that was rising in the east that met the horizon was Scorpio, and it really orients their chart that way. So their second house now becomes Sagittarius. How they go about their values and value systems is in a very Sagittarius kind of way, right? Their 10th house, for example, that we talked about, is very Leo-like, where they want things to be bigger than themselves. They want to project confidence. They want to project regality, right? So they go about their careers or the things, their duties and responsibilities in life in a very Leo kind of way. And this is a very important concept. So whenever you look at your chart or whenever you look at forecasts, Luckna or the rising sign is the most accurate forecast for yourself. A lot of people go about looking at forecasts in newspapers or these days looking at YouTube by using their sun sign. First of all, Western sun sign is a sign off, like we talked about, going about it using their moon sign, which is what a lot of people in the Indian subcontinent do. But the Luckna is what gives you the most accurate, most distilled description or quality of your own individual self. The next slide. The other thing that is very unique to Vedic astrology, and it really sets it apart from Western or tropical astrology, is the Dasha cycles. So on the right, I've put the picture of a moon there, and the moon is in Vrishabha is Taurus. The moon is in Taurus in the nakshatra of Kritika. So based on where the moon is placed, and it depends on the rising sign and all of that, wherever the moon is in the sky, wherever it falls, that nakshatra, based on that nakshatra, that constellation, your dasha cycles are decided. And dashas or mahadashas literally are translated into time cycles. And so the moon is in Kritika, for example, and this is a deeper concept, so feel free to ask about this later. Kritika is activates sun. So the person born with moon in Kritika will start off with the sun, Mahadasha. And dashas are like these schools or universities you go to, and each dasha lasts for a particular amount of time. And in that dasha or that time cycle, that planet whose dasha it is, so with moon and Kritika, they'll start off with sun dasha. That planet sun becomes responsible for imparting soul's lessons. So the biggest impact on their psyche, the biggest impact on that space-time continuum and their consciousness will be from sun, and sun will take responsibility of delivering its karmic lessons. On the left, I have given an example of the moon in Magha, which activates Ketu, the south node of the moon. So when this person is born, they're born into the time cycle of Ketu, and Ketu, which the time cycle or dasha lasts for about 7 years, will become responsible for imparting the karmic lessons that it represents to that native. And then it follows so on. After Ketu, you go into Venus. After Venus, you go into Sun. After Sun, you go into Moon. After Moon, you will go into Mars, and so on and so forth. So each planet comes, its time cycle gets activated, and then it becomes responsible for imparting its karmic lessons or ripening those karmas within you, which is literally the probability of outcomes, right? If you think in terms of quantum physics and the double slit experiment that we talked about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
very fascinating.
Yeah. So when we talk about how spirit takes form, we think about what affects the conscious mind and then what collapses that consciousness into a physical reality. So all those things that we talked about today, which is the 27 nakshatras, the 12 zodiac, the 9 planets, including Rahu and Ketu, the Luckna, which is your rising sign, and the Mahadasha cycles, the Dasha and Mahadasha cycles, have a profound, all these things converge. So many things converge to create one reality that you are experiencing right now. Next slide. And with that, I wanted to end my talk giving you a flavor of, it's very deep. Every single concept is very, very deep. But this is just trying to give you a flavor of how spirit takes form. And it's very deep philosophically. It requires years of study and work and years of just feeling how these energies feel in your body, right? Because the planets are constantly in transit. They're transiting through these nakshatras or portions of sky, and how that feels in your psyche, and what karmas are they ripening in your mind and in your consciousness. So it takes a lot of time to just for these energies to mature and for you to even understand how spirit takes form just in your own body, right? That's so important. So on a closing note, I will say for if you want to reach me, you can write to me at malini@cosmicartandscience.com. My website is cosmicartandscience.com. And my Instagram handle is your friend Malini. I'm also actually teaching on March 19th. I'm teaching a relationships class. So the 7th house, right? Relationships, the least integrated aspect of self. I'm teaching that. And to register for that class, you can go to Next Gen. The conference is called Next Generation of Vedic Astrology. So the link to that conference for you to register, it's actually really dirt cheap to register, is nextgen-malini.secure checkout.com.
Yeah, and I think
Thank you.
I think the whole conference is like $70 or something for all the teachings.
Yeah, the whole conference is $70.
Yeah.
And you know, we go much more in depth. So I talked about the Luckna, which is yourself, the sign that's rising in the east. At this conference, I particularly will be talking about the sign that is setting in the west, which is directly opposite you. That represents all your relationships. But there are other people in the conference who are great astrologers, and they're talking about very different aspects of astrology. They're going, Alex is going deep into the nodes that we touched upon today. Elise is going to talk about transits and Dasha cycles that we touched upon today. Casey is going to go over new moons and full moons and how to use that in your regular practice. And Alexis is actually going to elaborate more on the Luckna or the rising sign itself. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it gives you in depth of what you need to know in just even understanding your own makeup, right? And even start doing astrology on a very basic level, on a very foundational level. It's pretty good. And you know, like Justine, who has put this conference up, and I'm so grateful to her. Next Gen of Vedic Astrology is where younger people like me. I'm using the term young not in terms of age, but in terms of years of practicing astrology. So people who are practicing it for about 5-10 years now and are doing a lot of readings are going to be presenting. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, Malini. I feel like you've just given us a complete introduction to Vedic astrology in 20 minutes. And I know that many friends will want to review this and, you know, really go through it again in depth, and everybody will have the recording. So you can go through it again. Scarlett, who I know has a great interest in Vedic astrology, says, really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm looking on Facebook. We've had quite a few people come through. Are there any questions that you have right now, Scarlett, or anyone else on Facebook? I know some people had to pop off and are going to come back on and finish up the lecture, but the recording will remain there on Facebook for a couple of weeks, I think, until I take it down. Let me come back and say hello. Thank you, Malini. That was so comprehensive and so beautiful. And so those of you know, Malini and I are going to have another chance to be with you all tomorrow at, I have to check the time. I think it's tomorrow at 10 a.m. We're going to be chatting again. So there'll be part 2 of this. Scarlett says, no questions, just appreciating the clarity and comprehensive teachings. Yeah, it was really beautiful how you brought in the quantum physics in a way that we could really, you know, because sometimes, especially for people who are not familiar with Vedic astrology, it just seems like, how can these planets up in the sky have an effect on me and have an effect on my life? But that, especially that picture of the divots in the space-time continuum, it's so powerful to see that and then to draw all these things together. So I really appreciate everything that you presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justine. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. And I'll get to see you again tomorrow. Thank you, Melanie. I always love to spend time with you.
Yep. Same
Take
here.
care. Much
Take
love.
care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.